Hello Virgo, and welcome to today's tarot journey. If Virgo is your sun sign, moon sign, or rising sign, I hope you'll find something meaningful in this reading. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments if any part of this message speaks to you in some way. This is a general reading, so I invite you to listen with your own intuition. Not every detail will fit your situation, and that's perfectly okay. Take what resonates, keep what feels meaningful, and gently leave behind anything that doesn't feel like it's meant for you. I'm simply here to share the story reflected through these cards. The person who understands your journey most deeply has always been you. And now, let's take a look at what the cards may be revealing about the path Virgo is currently walking. Sometimes, the things that exhaust us the most aren't the unexpected challenges that show up in life. They're the things that once made us happy. Because when something has brought us joy, we're usually willing to give it more time, more patience, and more chances. Some of you, Virgo, may be looking back at a relationship, a job, a responsibility, or even a familiar role you've carried for years with that exact feeling. It didn't begin with pressure. It began with excitement. It began with a feeling of your heart opening up. That's the energy that comes through with the Knight of Cups card here. Not as a grand romantic gesture or a dramatic love story, but as that moment when you genuinely believed something was worth investing your heart in, worth the effort, worth giving a little more time, a little more patience, a little more hope. And maybe that's exactly why it became so important. Because you cared, because you showed up fully, because you meant it. Then the Sun card appears, carrying a very different feeling. It brings you back to those days when everything seemed simpler. The conversations that made you smile without even realizing it. The plans that gave you something to look forward to. The moments when life felt like it was moving in the right direction. There are seasons in life when simply thinking about a person, a goal, or a dream is enough to give you the energy to keep going. You wake up with a little more motivation, a little more patience, a little more willingness to try again, because deep down, you believe that what you're building matters. But there's something interesting about Virgo. You're not someone who walks away the moment things become difficult. In fact, it's often the opposite. When other people begin to pull back, you're usually the one who stays. When others start feeling tired, you're often the one saying, just a little longer, one more try, one more conversation, one more chance. And sometimes that's exactly how something beautiful slowly becomes heavy. The Ten of Wands card appears like someone still moving forward, not because they have endless energy, but because they've grown used to carrying too much. Responsibilities that stayed on their shoulders for far too long. Expectations that no longer fit but continue to be carried anyway. Feelings that have changed but are still being held in place as if nothing has shifted. Many Virgos don't immediately notice when they've crossed their own limits because you're incredibly good at enduring, incredibly good at adapting, incredibly good at being the reliable one. But sometimes maturity can also make a person forget to ask a very important question. Am I still happy carrying this? Some of you may have started feeling that question quietly rising to the surface. Not through a dramatic event, not through an argument, but through small moments. Waking up one morning and feeling strangely drained. Experiencing a brief silence while doing something you used to enjoy. Noticing a subtle feeling that you're putting in so much effort, yet the joy that once lived there doesn't feel as clear anymore. And what's important about this reading is that it doesn't carry blame. It isn't saying you were wrong for trying. It isn't saying that everything you built was meaningless. Quite the opposite. It shows a heart that was sincere. A heart that gave honestly. It's just that sometimes things change with time. And when they do, recognizing that change can be just as important as continuing to push forward. Because somewhere within these days, it feels like a part of you is beginning to see things differently. Less rushed, less focused on fixing everything, and more honest about what you're truly feeling. And from that quiet space, a new question seems to be taking shape. A question that is no longer about how to hold on, but about what is truly worth carrying with you as you move forward. Some questions don't appear at the beginning. They arrive much later, after countless attempts to understand, after telling yourself over and over again that maybe all you need is a little more time, one more conversation, one more explanation, one more perspective, and then everything will finally make sense. But sometimes, the most exhausting thing isn't the answer itself. It's not knowing whether that answer even exists. Some of you, Virgo, may be standing in front of that feeling right now, not completely lost, not completely hopeless. Just finding that the harder you try to understand something, the more difficult it becomes to hold on to. It's like looking through a window covered in fog. You know there's something on the other side. You can feel it, but you can't quite see the whole picture. The Eight of Swords card carries the feeling of days like these. Days when your thoughts keep circling back to the same place, trying to connect the dots, replaying conversations, remembering small details, thinking about what was said and what was never said. Everything seems like it should mean something, and yet nothing feels clear enough to settle your mind. One thing about Virgo is that uncertainty rarely feels comfortable. You're someone who wants to understand the reason behind things. You want to see the structure underneath the situation. You want to know why something happened. You want to know if there's a piece you're missing. But sometimes, when you're trying to untangle a knot that only one person is working on, the thread only becomes tighter. Then the Two of Swords card comes through, not as a major decision, but as the feeling of standing at a crossroads without truly wanting to take either path, because neither one feels clear enough. Some days you think you should keep going. Some days you think it's time to let go. Some days you still feel hopeful. And later that very same day, a quiet moment makes you wonder whether you're waiting for something that no longer exists. It's the kind of exhaustion that stays hidden. Nobody sees it. Nobody knows. Because on the outside, life continues as usual. You go to work. You answer messages. You take care of your responsibilities. But somewhere inside, part of your energy remains tied to a place where no clear response has arrived. And when that continues for too long, an imbalance begins to form. The Six of Pentacles card doesn't feel like money or exchange here. It feels like a scale. One side growing heavier, the other growing lighter. At some point, you begin to notice that you're the one reaching out more, thinking more, holding things together more, not because anyone asked you to, but because you've always wanted to do your part well. Yet, in any connection, whether it's love, work, or a personal dream, there comes a moment when the heart starts recognizing the difference between effort and burden, between patience and endless waiting, between hope and constantly convincing yourself to keep believing. And that may be why the Three of Wands card appears at the end of this chapter. It doesn't feel like immediate action. It feels more like someone standing quietly by a window for a very long time, looking into the distance, not searching for answers anymore, but observing their own emotions, watching what remains when expectations slowly begin to settle, watching what still holds value when assumptions can no longer support the weight of reality. For some of you, a little distance may be forming during this time, not to abandon something, but to see it more clearly. Because sometimes it takes a few steps back before we can truly recognize what's standing right in front of us. And from that distance, another shift seems to be taking shape, not loudly, not dramatically. Just the quiet feeling that maybe you're no longer willing to spend all of your energy trying to repair something that cannot be repaired by one person alone. Something very strange happens when someone has been trying for too long. They don't suddenly get angry. They don't immediately turn their back and walk away. And they usually don't wake up one morning and decide to give up on everything. More often than not, it begins with silence, a very small silence, so small that even they don't recognize it at first. It's like sitting in your car after a long day. The engine has been off for a while. A familiar song is still playing softly through the speakers. But instead of driving away, you just sit there for a few extra minutes. Not because you're waiting for someone, but because you no longer have the energy to think about the same problem one more time. That's the feeling the Four of Cups card carries here. Not exactly sadness, not exactly disappointment. More like the exhaustion that comes from walking through the same cycle over and over again. You've tried looking at things from different angles. You've given more chances. You've tried to understand things that were difficult to understand. You've told yourself that if you stayed patient long enough, eventually everything would make sense. But there comes a point when the heart starts sending a different signal. A signal that doesn't come from hurt. It comes from depletion. And when that happens, the thing that makes you stop is no longer the pain. It's the question, do I still want this? The Five of Wands card appears like background noise that has been playing for far too long. Not always loud arguments. Sometimes it's quiet pressure, conflicting expectations, the same misunderstandings repeating themselves. Conversations where nobody is truly listening. Or even the conflict happening inside yourself. One part wants to let go. One part still wants to hold on. One part wants to move forward. One part keeps looking back. Your energy gets pulled in too many directions at once. And that takes more from us than we often realize. Some people aren't tired because they're doing too much. They're tired because they're carrying too many thoughts at the same time. Virgo is often incredibly skilled at solving problems. When something feels off, your first instinct is usually to fix it. Find the solution. Find the reason. Find what's missing. But not everything in life can be healed through analysis. Not every relationship gets better because one person tries harder. Not every story is meant to be rescued. And that may be where the Fool card comes through. Not as a reckless leap, but as someone standing at the edge of a new road with lighter hands than before. For the first time in a long while, they're not carrying everything with them. They're not trying to control every outcome. They're not trying to predict every possibility. They're not taking responsibility for everyone's emotions. They're simply walking forward, one step at a time, with more curiosity than fear, with more trust than pressure. For someone who spent years carrying too much, that feeling can seem almost unfamiliar. And yet, that very feeling seems to be quietly emerging within this reading, as if a part of you is beginning to crave a deeper breath, a lighter way of living, a little more room for yourself. Then the High Priestess card appears, not loudly, not urgently, not trying to convince anyone of anything. It feels more like folding laundry on a quiet afternoon, or watching the last rays of sunlight stretch across the floor, and suddenly realizing something you've known all along. You just weren't ready to admit it yet. Intuition doesn't always speak in words. Sometimes it arrives as a feeling, a strange sense of calm, a quiet knowing that helps you understand what's truly exhausting you, what's draining your energy, what has already fulfilled its role in your life. No confirmation needed, no additional proof, no more debates. Just a gentle awareness, and from that awareness, it feels as though another door is beginning to open. Not the door of action, but the door of rest, the door of no longer feeling responsible for fixing everything, the door of allowing yourself to take a step back, and finally listen to what your heart has been trying to say for a very long time. Because as the noise slowly fades away, old memories begin to come into focus. And with them comes a completely different chapter, quietly waiting to be revisited through calmer eyes. Not every healing season begins with a major decision. Sometimes it begins with your body naturally wanting to slow down, wanting to go to bed a little earlier, wanting to put your phone away a little sooner, wanting to sit in your car for a few extra minutes before walking into the house, wanting to spend an entire weekend afternoon cleaning a corner of a room, making a cup of tea, or listening to a familiar song without feeling the need to do anything else. That feels very much like the energy surrounding this chapter. The Four of Swords card doesn't come through as a pause brought on by failure. It feels more like someone who has been walking for a very long time and finally finds an empty bench beneath a tree. Not because they can't keep going, but because they understand they need to rest before taking another step. There are pressures that have been quietly building for a long time. Thoughts that never found a release. Feelings that kept getting pushed aside for work, responsibilities, or whatever seemed more urgent in the moment. But emotions rarely disappear simply because we're busy. They wait, quietly, patiently. And when life finally slows down, they begin to speak. What's interesting is that within this stillness, another kind of energy starts to emerge, like a small flame being lit in the distance. Not overwhelming, not urgent. Just enough to bring warmth back into a corner of your heart. That's the feeling the Ace of Wands card carries here. It's not about rushing ahead. It's more like the moment you start wanting to live a little more for yourself. Wanting to try something new, wanting to return to a hobby you once loved but somehow left behind, wanting to spend time on things that make you feel present in your own life instead of simply checking off another task on the day's list. After spending so long focused on what wasn't working, your heart seems to be rediscovering its ability to notice simple things again. A sunny morning, a familiar road, a short but genuine conversation. Little moments like these begin to feel valuable in a way they may not have before. And then, as your mind becomes less consumed with searching for answers, another door quietly opens, the door of memory. The Six of Cups card appears very gently here. There's nothing dramatic about it. It doesn't arrive like an emotional wave that sweeps everything away. It feels more like hearing an old song playing in a grocery store, or passing a familiar place while driving through town. A scent, a phrase, a photograph. An object that's been sitting untouched in a drawer for years. Ordinary things suddenly bring an entire season of life back into focus. There were people who once meant a great deal. Stories that held a special place in your heart. Not all of them are still part of your present life, but traces of them remain. The difference is that this time, when you look back, the feeling isn't quite the same. There's more gentleness, more acceptance. It's like revisiting a chapter from a book you read long ago. You still remember it, but you no longer live inside it. The Five of Pentacles card suggests that there are still a few empty spaces that haven't completely disappeared. Moments when longing appears unexpectedly. Not the kind of longing that makes you want to go back. but the kind that misses a version of yourself from that time. The version that hoped deeply, trusted deeply, gave their whole heart to something. Sometimes what we miss isn't the person or the situation. It's the feeling we once had while we were living through it. And that realization seems to be bringing a different kind of peace. Not peace because everything is perfect, but peace because you're no longer forcing yourself to forget. No longer trying to prove that you're completely over it. Simply allowing those memories to exist where they belong, softly, quietly, without controlling your present the way they once did. And as your heart slowly learns to see things through calmer eyes, it feels as though a few details that once went unnoticed are beginning to reveal themselves. Like the surface of a lake finally becoming still enough for you to see what has been resting beneath it all along. There are moments in life when the answer doesn't arrive as a dramatic event. There isn't a sudden breakthrough. There isn't a conversation that changes everything overnight. There isn't a door swinging open right in front of you. Instead, the truth arrives slowly. So slowly that sometimes you don't even realize you've found it until you've already traveled quite a distance. It's like cleaning out an old cabinet. You take things out one by one, looking at each item carefully, and suddenly realizing there are things you haven't used in a very long time. They're still there, still taking up space, but they stopped serving your life a long time ago. The Ace of Pentacles card carries a similar feeling, not the energy of rushing forward, but the feeling that something real is beginning to take shape, a new perspective, a new way of living, a new set of values. After spending so much time looking back at what has already happened, your attention seems to be turning toward what can actually nourish you in the present. You're no longer asking only, why did that happen? You're beginning to ask something different. What is truly worthy of my time and energy? And that's a very different question. Sometimes changing the question changes the entire landscape. The Ace of Swords card appears like a breath of fresh air after days of gray skies. Not because everything suddenly becomes easy, but because your mind begins resisting less of what it has quietly known for a long time. There are things we often sense, long before we're ready to name them, long before we're ready to face them, long before we're ready to accept that certain truths may not look the way we once hoped they would. But eventually, there comes a point when avoiding the truth becomes more exhausting than looking directly at it. And that's when clarity begins to emerge, not as judgment, not as blame, but like someone switching on a light in a dark room. Everything is still exactly where it was before. The difference is that now you can see it more clearly. What's interesting is that this clarity arrives alongside the Moon card, which suggests that not everything is being understood through logic alone. Part of this journey seems to be unfolding in quiet moments, in subtle feelings. A sudden intuition while you're out for a walk, a thought that appears while you're washing dishes. A feeling that's difficult to explain when you encounter something familiar. Intuition rarely raises its voice. It doesn't argue. It doesn't try to prove itself. It simply stands there, patiently, waiting for you to listen. Some of you may have started noticing things that once slipped past your attention. Tiny details. Small signs that once seemed unimportant. A certain behavior. A silence that speaks louder than words. A pattern that keeps repeating. A feeling that appears whenever you think about a particular person, job, or situation. Not because the situation has changed, but because you're changing the way you look at it. And when that happens, the things that once felt confusing begin to lose their hold over you. The Six of Swords card appears like someone quietly leaving an old shoreline behind. Not because they hate where they've been, not because they're denying what once existed, but because they understand they are no longer the same person they used to be. Some decisions are not made in a single moment. They're built through hundreds of small reflections. Hundreds of observations, hundreds of moments where the heart quietly notices what brings peace and what continues to feel heavy. And then one day, a new direction begins to reveal itself, not as a perfect road, but as a calmer one, a gentler one, a path with less struggle, less forcing, less trying to make life become something it was never meant to be. And from that place, it feels as though another chapter is quietly beginning to unfold, a chapter that is no longer centered on understanding what happened, but on recognizing what still holds enough value to be nurtured and carried forward. There's a very big difference between holding on to something and genuinely wanting to build it. During emotional seasons of life, we don't always notice that difference. We hold on to memories. We hold on to hope. We hold on to what things used to be. But as the mind begins to settle, the heart starts asking different questions. No longer, how do I get things back to the way they were? But instead, if this continues to have a place in my life, what is it actually being built on? That's where the energy of the Ace of Cups card comes through. Not as an overwhelming wave of emotion that sweeps everything away, but more like clean water beginning to flow again after a long period of drought. Very gentle, very quiet, yet enough for you to notice that something has shifted. Maybe it's the feeling of your heart softening after being guarded for a long time. Maybe it's finding that you're no longer looking at everything through the lens of disappointment. Maybe it's simply allowing yourself to trust again, not because someone else has changed, but because something within you has changed. When a person has lived through enough lessons, they stop giving their heart away the same way they once did. They no longer place all of their faith in a beautiful moment. They no longer treat a promise as proof of everything. The way they love becomes more mature, slower, but also more genuine. The Eight of Pentacles card appears like a pair of hands patiently building something meaningful, one piece at a time, without needing attention, without rushing to prove anything, simply focused on what can be created through consistency. And this is a very Virgo kind of energy, because deep down, you've always understood that things with real value take time. A healthy relationship takes time. Trust takes time. Stability takes time. Even healing takes time. It feels as though you're becoming less interested in chasing whatever creates the strongest emotional reaction, and more interested in what has the ability to last. The things that show up consistently. The small actions that repeat themselves over time. The people who make you feel safe rather than simply excited. Then the Seven of Pentacles card slows the energy down even further. It feels like someone standing in a garden they've cared for over many months. They don't dig up the soil every day to see whether the seeds have started growing. They don't force the plants to grow faster. They simply observe. They listen. They pay attention to what is actually taking root. And that may be the space many of you are entering now. Not reacting immediately to every emotion. Not making decisions while the heart is still unsettled. Just allowing time to reveal what is truly sustainable. Then the Star card appears, but not as a distant dream. It feels more like the small light that remains after a storm has passed. You no longer need everything to be perfect in order to feel hopeful. You no longer need every answer before taking another step forward. There is a quiet faith returning. A faith that life still holds good things. A faith that what genuinely belongs in your life doesn't need to be forced. A faith that peace doesn't come from controlling everything, but from knowing what you truly deserve. And then the King of Pentacles card arrives as the grounding force at the end of this chapter, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a symbol of stability, someone who is no longer carried away by temporary emotions, someone who no longer makes decisions from loneliness, someone who no longer holds on to things simply because they're afraid of losing them. Instead, they look at what is real stability, real commitment, real value. And above all, they pay attention to what is genuinely nourishing their life. It feels as though many things are being sorted naturally during this time, not through dramatic endings, not through force, but through maturity. The things that survived only because of expectation are beginning to fade. The things with a true foundation are becoming easier to recognize. And as your heart grows calmer, steadier, and more grounded in reality, another movement seems to be unfolding somewhere in the distance. Almost like the final piece of a long story is slowly shifting into a new position. A shift significant enough that the entire picture may no longer be seen the way it once was. Not every major change begins with a dramatic moment. Sometimes it arrives as a truth you've seen many times before, but always found a way to look past. It's not a new truth. The difference is that this time, you've run out of reasons to explain it away. It feels as though certain things in your life are beginning to reveal their true nature. Not because someone deliberately exposed them, not because a secret suddenly came to light, but because the fog that once surrounded them is slowly beginning to lift. That's the energy the Tower card carries in this reading. It doesn't necessarily feel like a sudden upheaval. It feels more like walking into a familiar room and realizing that something inside you no longer feels the same. Everything is still there. The people are still there. The circumstances are still there. But your experience of them has changed. What you once accepted now gives you pause. What you once overlooked is becoming impossible to ignore. What once felt normal no longer feels aligned. It's the kind of change that happens internally, quietly. But once it begins, it's difficult to reverse. Because once you've truly seen something, it's hard to return to the version of yourself that hadn't. Some Virgos may be realizing they've poured too much energy into a situation that no longer meets them with the same sincerity. Others may be recognizing that they've stayed longer than their heart truly wanted to. And some are beginning to see the empty spaces they once tried to fill with hope alone. Not to blame anyone, not to judge the past, simply to see things as they are. And from that clarity, the Eight of Cups card begins to emerge. It doesn't feel like giving up. It feels more like someone walking out of an old house after gathering everything they truly need, without anger, without resentment, without turning their back on the past, simply understanding that they no longer belong there. Some goodbyes don't happen between two people. They happen between a person and an older version of themselves. The version that tolerated more than it needed to. The version that believed enough effort could fix everything. The version that placed other people's needs ahead of their own peace. And then, somewhere along the way, maturity begins to take the shape of walking away. Not in search of something else, but in order to return to yourself. What's beautiful is that whenever space is created, life suddenly has room for something new. That's where the Four of Wands card comes through. It feels like the comfort of a peaceful home, not a perfect place, but a place where you can finally exhale, a place where you don't have to stay on guard, a place where you don't have to explain yourself endlessly, or constantly prove your worth, or live in a state of waiting and wondering what someone else is thinking. For many of you, this may be the season where you're beginning to understand that peace isn't a reward you receive after every problem has been solved. It's the feeling that arrives when you stop staying in situations that continuously drain your energy. And within all of these shifts, the Two of Cups card appears very gently, not like a fairy tale, not like a fantasy. It feels more like the image of a healthy connection. And first and foremost, a healthy connection with yourself. Because the more you begin listening to your true feelings, the more a new kind of harmony starts to form. You become clearer about what you need, clearer about what you no longer wish to continue, clearer about where your boundaries truly are. And from that place, relationships, opportunities, and experiences that align with you become easier to recognize, not through logic, but through a natural feeling. Like walking into a room and instantly knowing whether you feel comfortable there or not. It feels as though a quiet reorganization is taking place, not too quickly, not too loudly, but enough to change the way you see what currently exists in your life. And as a few old doors begin closing in their own way, another meeting seems to be waiting somewhere ahead. Not necessarily with another person, but perhaps with a newer version of yourself. A version that has lived through enough experiences to finally know what is truly worth keeping. Some chapters in life don't end with a period. They end with a shift in the way we see them. The thing that once broke your heart no longer carries the same weight. The thing that once kept you awake at night no longer occupies every corner of your mind. The thing that once felt impossible to release slowly becomes a quiet memory. And sometimes, that's the clearest sign that a cycle is finally reaching its conclusion. The Three of Cups card appears like a gentle breeze after a long journey. Not the energy of overwhelming emotion, but the feeling of being able to breathe again, of reconnecting with life, of finding joy in simple things. A meal shared with people you care about, a sincere conversation, a sudden laugh that catches you off guard after a season when you thought you'd forgotten how it felt to be lighthearted. It feels as though, after so much reflection and inner searching, your heart is beginning to find its own balance again. And it's in moments like these that the Six of Cups card appears once more. But this time, it doesn't carry the feeling of regret. It feels more like opening an old photo album. Seeing familiar faces, familiar places, stories that once meant everything. You still remember them. You still appreciate them. But you no longer feel the need to return and live inside those days again. The past still has value. Its role has simply changed. It's no longer a place to remain. It's become a place that helps you understand how much you've grown. There may be a conversation, a meeting, an explanation, or perhaps just an understanding that arrives quietly within you without anyone needing to say a word. The Knight of Swords card carries the energy of clarity, not clarity that comes from someone else, but clarity that comes from within. After everything you've experienced, you know more clearly what you want. You know what fits your life better. You know your boundaries more deeply than before. Some decisions that once felt impossible begin to feel surprisingly simple, not because the circumstances have changed, but because the person making the decision has changed. And that's where the Death card comes through, not as loss, but as the image of old leaves falling from a tree to make room for new growth. Some versions of yourself have completed their purpose. The version that always tried to make everyone happy. The version that carried more responsibility than necessary. The version that believed love meant endless sacrifice. All of those identities are slowly giving way to something different, something lighter, something more honest, something closer to who you truly are. The Chariot card appears as a powerful movement within your inner world, no longer standing at countless crossroads, no longer constantly turning around to look behind you. It feels as though the wheels of your life are beginning to move in a new direction, not because someone else is pushing them, but because you've finally chosen that direction for yourself. And what's beautiful is that this path is no longer built on the fear of losing something. It's built on self-respect. Then the Nine of Pentacles card brings in a beautiful image. Someone sitting beside a window at the end of the day. Soft sunlight filling the room, no longer needing anyone else to validate their worth. No longer needing achievements to prove they deserve happiness. Simply feeling whole in their own company. And perhaps that's one of the greatest transformations in this entire journey. Not learning how to hold on to something, but learning how not to lose yourself while holding on to it. Then the Six of Pentacles card closes this reading with a profound sense of balance. Not everything needs to be carried forward. Not everyone is meant to walk beside us for the entire journey. Not every story ends the way we once imagined it would, but every experience leaves something valuable behind, a lesson, a layer of growth, a new perspective, a strength we may never have known we possessed. What seems present here isn't the feeling of loss. It's the feeling of returning to what truly matters, returning to values that no longer need to be proven, and most importantly, returning to yourself. Because sometimes the peace we've been searching for all along isn't found in holding on to something. It's found in the moment we finally realize we are still whole, even after releasing what no longer belongs in our lives.